All right. All right. All right. Hi, folks. It's Friday at 1 o'clock, and you've voluntarily signed up for an Excel webinar. So congratulations. We will spend about an hour talking about some Excel basics / intermediate skills as far as things like quantitative data summarization, data management, and just some basic ways to kind of organize your data. I'm going to start pretty basic, just to make sure that everybody kind of has those early easy skills before we're going to get to anything slightly more advanced. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get going. All right. Everybody see a PowerPoint slide? All right. So thanks to Debbie. Oh. There. Oh, good.
I don't.
All right. So
Brian
should see.
Wait.
Yeah.
No, we don't. We see your Slack. There we go.
My Slack.
Yeah.
Do you see PowerPoint now?
I do.
All right. Good. I got 10 windows open, like many of you do, I'm sure. Okay. I'm probably a tiny bit slow today, tiny bit behind, internet-wise. All right, so the basic stuff we're going to cover today is just the basic math functions, adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. We'll work with the sum function, which is super simple to use, but very effective. And then just kind of some of the really basic summarization functions in Qualtrics, things like average, median, finding the minimum and the maximum value of a range of values, for example. And then the intermediate functions that I want to hit, the ones that I use the most. There's a family of functions called count. So count, count A, and count if. We're going to cover those three today. We're going to look at finding values and replacing them with something else. So if you need to code something, so let's say you have a bunch of responses from a survey and they're words. So it says like disagree or it says agree. You want to change those to numbers like 1 or 5 so you can do some math with them. We'll use that function to do that. And then we'll finish up with the if-then function. And that is one that is really handy to have a cell look at a series of cells, and if they meet criteria, then it returns a different value. And that'll all make sense here in a minute. All right, so I wanted to pick a real set. And so I am going to be looking at data from Dining with Diabetes. So is everybody seeing my Qualtrics Dining with Diabetes survey? So this is a survey that we give to every person in the program. We do a pre-test when they start. We do a post-test after their 4th session. And then we do a follow-up anywhere from 3 to 6 months later. So we get a lot of data from folks, and we have a lot of stuff to work with. And I'll pick a few data fields from this evaluation to kind of showcase some stuff today. So, you can see we ask a lot of questions around what they learned, obviously, or if it's the pretest, what they haven't learned yet. So like these first 7 questions, these are questions that have right answers and wrong answers. So these are questions that we actually score, and then we add up the scores. And then we subtract the post-test score, the pretest score from the post-test score, and see if they improved their score. And we attribute that to basically an increase in knowledge, right? So if you get a higher score when you're done than you did with pretest, then you gain some knowledge. So we use some basic skills in that. We ask about frequency of stuff a lot. So how many days did you exercise or eat a variety of fruits and vegetables or those kind of things? And again, we'll see if they increase the number of days they did these positive activities from pre-test to post-test to follow-up. And we can sort of attribute that to an increase in behavior change, right? So if you started out looking at portion sizes 2 days a week, and after the program you're at about 5 days a week, then you obviously have changed your behavior in a very positive way. We use agree and disagree statements. And again, we look at those and see who says agree and disagree throughout the course of the program. So here's a frequency question that uses not days of the week, but never, rarely, sometimes, frequently, and always. And we do a lot of stuff with that, which we'll show you here. We ask, obviously, reg data type questions. We also ask about education. And we ask about if they have a recent A1C score. And again, A1C is essentially a measure of blood sugar expressed in a percentage. And we look at A1C scores at pre-test and then again later on and see if they've actually improved that score, which would be an indicator of health increase. So again, we do
Brian?
this, yeah.
We have someone that's asking, what is that red X no response about?
Awesome. That's a great question.
Yeah.
So this is a paper survey that we give to people, and then those are entered by people all over the country, actually. So I actually run this survey for about 6 or 8 different states, and we aggregate all their data into one big data set. So when you are entering data into, so people are entering paper surveys into an online survey, right? To get it all into the database. So I have probably, I don't know, I'm going to guess maybe 40 different people who are entering data into this one database. And if I export the data and there are blank fields, right? If there's no answer to a certain question, I want to know if that was left blank by the participant or if that was a missed question by the person entering the data, right? So if that is in fact, if I'm entering a paper survey and the participant left it blank, then I would click no response. And that tells me, Brian, that that was left blank. If I see that it's totally blank and there's no answer at all, then I'm going to assume that was a data entry error. So I would then go back to that person and say, hey, could you fill this in appropriately? So yeah, good question. Okay, let's get into Qualtrics. Let's get into Excel. Let's leave Qualtrics. So when I export the data from that DWD survey, it looks like this. There's a ton of it, pre-test, post-test, follow-up, and it is all organized by so each individual row is one participant, and the pre-test, post-test, and follow-up is all in the same row, so I can do all the math really simply. So what I'll do is we'll kind of work through some of the functions in Excel, and then I'll kind of show you how I do it with some various fields in this evaluation. All right, so we're going to start with basic math. Hopefully it's not too basic, but we need to start here. So in Excel, you can write formulas in individual cells to do some kind of a computation. You also have up here in the ribbon, you have an entire section called formulas. So if I click that, I now have a world of formulas, and there are hundreds of them in here. You can do advanced analysis. You can do chi-square tests. You can do t-tests. You can do all kinds of stuff. Or you can just add two numbers together and everything in the middle. So if you go through any of these menus, so right here is a frequently used one. It's going to just give you all of these different functions that you can kind of drop in. So you can hand type a formula into a cell by yourself, or you could hit one of these and it kind of does it for you. All right, but we'll start with this the old-fashioned way. All right, so these are just two columns of data. Column A, column B. Who cares what they are? Maybe they're ages, maybe they are scores, whatever they are. They're weights, who knows? So if I'm going to add two columns, so all formulas start with an equal sign. That's the most important thing I can tell you. If you want to write a formula in Qualtrics, you start with an equal sign. And then you need to put something there to write your formula. So if you click on a cell, and then that cell number will show up next to your equal sign. And then let's say I want to add column A and column B. So we're going to add A2 to B2. And then I'm going to hit return. And there you go. So that is how you add cells in Qualtrics. And of course, if I want to copy this cell all the way down here for the rest of these, if you were here yesterday for Debbie's presentation, you go to your corner and you grab it and you pull down and you let go. And there you go. So I added up all those cells. So if we want to subtract these cells from each other, let's go column A minus column B and then return. And then the same thing, just grab that and pull that down. And then let's multiply them. So if you don't know, the X is not multiply. It's actually the asterisk above the 8. That is your multiplication symbol. And finally, we'll just divide. And we'll do A divided by B. And divide is /. And there you go. All right. I guess we'll take a few detours today. The first one is formatting cells. So here we have 1,000,000 decimal points. I don't want to look at that. So I'm going to highlight these cells, and I'm going to format them to maybe 1 decimal point. So if you right click, you get your little menu here, and formatting cells is right there. So the first kind of option for formatting cells, if you don't know this is a great little place to go. You can format things by date or by percentages, by fractions. But in general, you're going to hang out in sort of this number category where you can set your decimal places to, let's do 1. And then it's going to just move all those to 1 decimal place and looks much tidier. All right. So that is the basic math. Let's go ahead and show you some real quick.
Brian, here, I have a question here. Do you put in the plus sign before, like if you say cell A2 plus B2, or you just click the cells and then the signs, the additional symbol just appear by itself? Do you have to put it in?
I put it in. So literally I'm doing
okay.
Equal the cell, and then I hit plus, and then the cell. Yep.
Okay.
Good question.
Thank you.
All right. So let's go ahead and sum these up. So let's see. So I have all these. Let's say, I don't know. Let's say this is dollars. So let's say that, each one of these rows is a different, I don't know. I'm going to go out and say a different Girl Scout who's selling Girl Scout cookies, and they went to location A and they sold this many dollars, and went to location B and sold this many dollars. How many dollars did they make at location A? How many did they make at location B? Something like that. All right, so again, here's the equal sign. We're going to use the sum function. So I'm just going to type sum. And again, it's going to auto-fill all these different options, but we just want the basic sum. The great thing about Qualtrics formulas is that a little gray box appears underneath what you're typing, and it literally tells you what it wants to make this formula work. So you can see this one's telling me sum, parentheses, number 1, comma, number 2, comma, number 3, etc. Right? So it wants a range of cells. I'm not going to type A2, A3, A4, A5, all that. I'm just going to grab, I'm going to left click and just pull down the whole thing, and I'm going to get a range. So see that? And so Excel, when it does a range, it uses the colon. And then I'm going to hit return. And that is returned 514, which is the sum of cells A2 through A11. Super simple. And again, the other way to do it, let's go up here and we'll just drop it in right here, sum. And now it wants, all right, so Excel's smarter than you think it is. So I dropped that formula in here, and it immediately knew what I wanted to do. It knew that I wanted to add up the cells above this one cell, because that's what we do all day long. And so if I hit return, it comes back with 623. So either way you want to do it, if you want to type it yourself, or if you want to go up and find it in the menu up there. Then if I wanted to, I could just grab this, and I could pull this sum formula all the way over, and we'll just sum up all those different columns. And if you're not aware of this, when you copy and paste something, Excel knows that you're moving across the screen. So for example, this cell was summing up B2 to B11, right? I drug it over here to C, and it immediately changed to C2 to C11. So it basically is going to keep the same format of what you have been doing Because again, Excel's smart and it kind of knows what you want to do. All right, so those are the basics of sort of adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. And so, yeah, and some formatting too, which is super important to know. All right, so if we go back to my example of dying with diabetes. So here is, so I told you we had 7 questions and they're all scored, right? And we want to get a total score for everybody. So here's like 10 participants. Here are the questions. Blood sugar, my plate, which foods contain carbohydrates, which, how do you control blood glucose, that kind of stuff. And then so those came out of Qualtrics. I added these yellow columns to put a score in. So here you get 1 point or 0 points. Here you get 1 point or 0 points. Here you get 0 through 5 points. Here you get 0 through 6 points, etc. Right? And so each individual question has its own score. So I want a total score. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add up the score from question 1 all the way to question 7. So again, super simple. I'm just going to put an equal sign. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to click on this person's score on question 1, which is B2. I'm then going to hit the plus sign, and then I'm going to add on their answer to question 2, which is D2. And then we're going to add question 3. And then we're going to add question 4. We're going to add question 5, and 6, and 7. So you don't have to have cells next to each other to do functions. You can literally grab them from wherever you want to. So if I hit return now, so that person scored a 21. I believe that's out of 27 is the highest score. And then if I do this, I can get everyone's score on the pretest. So there you go. So now I have the score for 10 participants on the pretest. And hopefully they'll do better on the post-test. All right, so let's look at the next kind of set of really basic things. Looking at averages, looking at medians, looking at minimums, and looking at maximums. So here, for example, is a list of ages. We asked them what their age was, and we have a bunch of ages. So I'm curious, what's the average age of this class? So real quick housekeeping thing. So me, when I'm doing sort of computations and math and stuff, I like to keep my math separate from my data. And so I've always been in this habit of throwing in like a break of some kind. So maybe something like that. So above that line is data, below that line is math. All right, so average. Guess what the formula for average is? That's right, it's average. I wish it was mean, because mean would be shorter to type, but it is average. So I want the average of these ages. So I'm literally going to highlight these cells, and we're going to see that range A2 to A15, and I hit return, and the average age is 71. So that seems very convenient. I wonder if there's a decimal in there somewhere. I'm going to go to format cells, and we'll go to number, and we'll make it 1 decimal. And, oh, okay, 71.0. All right, so that's literally the average. And I might put maybe this over here on the right side so I can keep track of what I'm doing. All right, so, oh, that's right. All right, so you guys all saw those numbers change, or maybe you didn't. I used a random number generator to generate those ages. And that is a live formula. So whenever you do anything near it, it generates a whole bunch of new ages. So I'm going to, as to not confuse us, I'm going to move stuff out of here. All right. I'm going to copy. If you were at Debbie's yesterday, you know how to paste special. You know how to paste your values. All right. So instead of having those formulas generate new numbers every single second, I'm now just going to use my pasted values and redo this. And if we have time today, I can show you how to use the random number generator because it's a lot of fun. All right, so 68.4 is our new average for these. All right, looking for a median. The function is median, and we highlight this, and our median is 67.5. Looking for a minimum. It is min. And again, it wants the range. So the lowest number in this set of numbers is 55. There it is. Again, I can see that it's only 10 numbers, but if you have a list of hundreds or thousands of data points, these little functions are super helpful. Sure, you could sort it from smallest to largest, but you could just type these in and go look really quickly. All right, this class was about 68.5 years old on average, with a median age of 67.5. The youngest person was 55 and the oldest person was 87. So there you go. So real quick, that took a couple minutes, and I now know a lot about the ages of my participants. All right, so we're gonna move on to a little bit more advanced stuff. Again, it's all super simple for the most part. But just a little bit more advanced formulas. All right, so a couple questions that we ask people on this evaluation are how often they eat the following. So how often do you eat bad things like fried foods, and how often do you eat 5 or more servings of fruits and vegetables in a day? And we ask them this pre-test, post-test, and follow-up. So maybe you ask people something similar about frequency of behavior. This could also be like an agreement scale. So you could ask people if they agree or disagree or strongly agree or whatever about something. And you want to see if they, what they say at pretest and what they say after your program, for example. All right, so again, here we have some random people, and here are their answers to this question, and here are the answers to this question. So what I want to do first is I want to find out how many people said rarely, how many said never, how many said sometimes, how many said frequently, and how many said always, and what is the percentage of the group who said those different things. So to do that, I need to count how many times those words appear in the data set, right? So I need to count how many times rarely was answered. Or we'll start with never. So never was answered 1 time, right? Again, looking at this, I can count 1. But if you have a data set of hundreds or thousands, you can't go and count each individual one. So I need to be able to count this. And to do that, I'm going to use the count function. So count, as you can see here in the autofill, there's a whole bunch of count functions, and they're all super useful. The really basic one is just count, and that is going to count all of the numbers in a range. So if you have maybe a column or a row that has a bunch of words and numbers in it, and you want to count how many numbers are in there, you can use count. Count A is also very useful, more useful than count, I think. So count A just counts all the cells that are not blank. So for example, so you see here we have a blank, right? Someone didn't answer that question. So it counts all the cells that are that have something in them. So for example, there's 12 cells filled in that range. If we look at these cells over here by dragging this over, so it's counting out of these cells how many are not blank, all 12. Out of all these cells, how many are not blank, 11. And we'll use this here in a minute to calculate percentages. All right, but the one that I use the most is count if. I'll stick my equal sign. All right, so count if is just that. It'll count something if a certain condition is true. So again, I want it to count all of the instances in that column where the word never is true, right? All right, and again, in great Qualtrics fashion, Excel fashion, it is giving me what it wants right here. So count if, and then the range, and then the criteria. So I've got COUNTIF and I got my parenthesis, and now I'm going to give it the range that it wants. There you go, A13 to A14, comma, and now it wants the criteria. Whenever you put criteria into Qualtrics, you need to put it in quotation marks. So to reiterate, that is going to count something in that range if it says never. So there you go, 1. It's exactly what we're hoping for. So in there's one instance of the word never. So now I'm going to do the exact same thing for the other frequencies, right? All right. So I could open this up. I could retype everything again, and then type in rarely and go for it. But I want to just copy and paste this formula, right? So real quick, what if I were to lose my ability? There it is. Okay. So I copy this and I drug it down. Something catastrophic just happened though. Can someone tell me what happened to this formula and why it's very bad? Anybody? All right, I will tell you. I see someone in the chat. Someone in the chat's going to tell me. Yeah, great, awesome. So the cell range changed. Perfect. Good job, Stacy. All right. So again, Excel is very smart. If you copy a cell over, it's going to move that entire range with it, right? But in this case, I want the range to stay the same. So this went from A3 to A14. I want that range to stay the same. I pulled it down here and it went from A14 to A15, which includes this blank space. If I were to keep pulling this down, the range is going to keep on shifting down. Now it's at A17 to A18, A7 to A18. So that's obviously very bad. You're going to get very, very, very messed up data. So what we need to do is we need to lock that range in place. And you do that using the magical $sign. All right, so if I go back here to my formula, I'm going to throw a $sign right before the number. So now it says $3 to $14. And a $sign is code to Excel to say, right after this $sign, you're going to lock that in place and you're not going to change it no matter what I do. So now we're going to pull this down. And if I check my range, it is exactly the same, right? So everything's exactly the same. Now, if I were to, so I lock down the number because I'm just going vertical. If I wanted to take this formula and write it far, far away, then I would also lock down the A, for example. So I would come up here and I would put a $sign before the A. And now that's locked in the column and the row, and I can take that wherever I want. All right, so now I need to change is the word, right? That's a lot easier than typing the whole thing. All right, so rarely. All right, 6 folks said rarely, great. Next, sometimes. All right, 2 folks said sometimes. Next is frequently. And the final one is always, right? And that one we don't need. So there you go. So that is going to be what we said, never. We don't lose where we're at.
Frequent.
All right. Okay. All right. So I have a really, really fancy Macintosh laptop, and it has that like little bar at the top where you can touch things, and they change all the time, and it's more trouble than it's worth. So I brushed up against that for cell in there. All right, so that's better. Okay. And then all we need to do for the next door is pull it over. And it keeps it keeps, oh no, okay. So we need to turn off this $sign because it locked in the A column. We want it to come over to the B column with us because we're looking at the B's now. So always be aware of what you're doing. There you go, B3 to B14, perfect, okay. All right, so now I have a real quick snapshot of the frequency, the counts of who said these different things. All right, I'm gonna go one step further really quick and do a percentage, let's say. So I need to know how many answers we have, right? So to find a percentage, we need to know the numerator is the number of times someone said something. The denominator is the total number of answers, right? So I can see here that there's clearly 12 answers, right? So I could just go in here and do 1 divided by 12. So 0.08, so, or 8% of the people said never, right? However, as oftentimes happens with big data sets, you might have holes, people who just didn't answer the question. And you don't want to count them in the overall numbers because they didn't answer the question. So you don't have a response from them. So in column A, I have 12 responses. In column B, I have 11 responses. So if I use this formula over here, and I divide this by 12, then that's not entirely accurate. We only have 11 people or 11 answers. So I'm going to use the function we talked about earlier, which is count A, which again is going to count the number of cells that have an answer in it. That's it, the ones that are not blank. So we know that one's got 12, and we know next door has 11. And now I can take my answers and divide it by the denominator and get a percentage. So this is very similar to what we did earlier. So I'm going to say, what's this, never, divided by the number of responses. And I want that 12 to be in every single response. So I'm going to make A22 always there. So I'm going to lock that cell. And there we go. So that is never, rarely, sometimes, frequently, and always. All right. And then I can grab that and put that over here. All right. We'll just double check our work and make sure that this did, in fact, divide by 11, right? So we have that value divided by B22, which is that. Perfect. Now, these are pretty squirrely numbers, so we're going to go ahead and format these cells, just like we looked at earlier. And we're going to use this percentage function. And 1 decimal point seems plenty. And there you go. And we'll just copy our labels down here, paste them right here. And there you go. So now we have the percentage of people who are in this class on, this is the post test, how often they eat fried foods and how often they eat 5 or more servings of vegetables and fruits a day. So there you go. So that's a nice little thing you could just copy and put into a table and put into a report or share with your educators or whatever. All right, so that is kind of the count family. Super easy, but really, really effective to get through a bunch of data at once. And again, with only 12 responses, not a big deal. But if I jump over here to kind of a bigger data set, this one I chopped at 100. I've got several thousand responses in this data set, but this one is good to look at. Let's see, where did we do this? Here. So here we ask people if they agree, if they disagree, or if they're unsure about some questions. And here we go again, hundreds of answers and lots of missing values. But I did the same thing essentially. I just did count. I looked for how many times they said agree or unsure or disagree, and then I calculated a percentage. So, all right. I want to move on to find, and replace. So if you look here, this is pretty much the same data set, more or less, that we just looked at. So that's great. We could calculate, we could look at our tables again and do frequencies really easily. But again, like I said, we asked this question on the post-test and on the pre-test. So I want to take their post-test answer and see if that is more frequent or less frequent than the pre-test answer, right? My goal for my participants is that at the end of the class, they will eat less fried foods, right? And that you want them to eat more servings of fruits and vegetables a day, or more frequently eat fruits and vegetables, 5 or more servings a day. So you want this, like this set of questions in fried foods to go down, and you want this frequency to go up. So to do that, you need some numbers. You can't really subtract words from each other. So to do that, I need to change all of these into numbers. Basically, I need to code them. A quick note, in Qualtrics, when you export your data out of Qualtrics, you can in fact choose to have it export coded data. And you'll get a spreadsheet with just numbers representing these values. So if you know what the code is by going into Qualtrics and looking, then you can skip this step more or less. But for me, I always like to export the actual words so I can do tables and I quickly code them so I can do math. All right, so if you know how to do this, it is kind of repetitive, but if you don't, here's how you find things and replace them with something else. So I'm just going to highlight these 2 columns that I'm working on. Up here in, I think it's the home window, the home ribbon. Yep, here it is. So there is a find and select magnifying glass. You can also do Command F to get to it quickly. And here's where you find your sort and your filter. So if you've been around Debbie's presentation, you'll have be very familiar with sort and filter. So next to that is find and select. So find is great. If you want to find like one person's data in a sea of data, you can use find, but I'm going to use the replace function. All right, so it's going to go find something, it's going to replace it with something else. So for example, I'm going to go find never. And when it finds never, I'm going to replace it with a 0. So the code is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just to be super easy. And I want it to replace all the values. And there we go. So if you notice over here, it took my never and it turned it into a 1. And I'll just do this with all of them. So rarely code that to a 1, replace all. And there you go. Let's see, sometimes it's going to be a 2. No, don't find it, replace it. Great. So a word of caution, when you start doing this, you are literally changing your data, right? So be aware of that. You can always do undo and you can go back a little bit, but be very careful when you do this. It's always good to have an unedited data set kind of put aside somewhere as a copy if you need to come back to this, if you totally mess it up. And always is going to be a 4. And just like that, I've converted my words into numbers that I can now do some math with. And replace all. Great. Okay. So that's find and replace. I do it a lot. I like working with both the sort of the qualitative word stuff, but also having the freedom to convert that into actual numbers. All right, so next, thanks Debbie, good point. Debbie's frequent recommendation to keep stuff as raw data. All right, let's look at this in the kind of the real world. All right, so here you go, I just did this, right? So here's the pre-test, fried food question, fruits and veggie question. Here's the post-test, fried foods, fruits and veggies. Each row is one person. So person number 3, or row 3, is somebody who answered what? Sometimes, sometimes, and then rarely and rarely. So hey, that's good. This person is, after the class, they're eating less frequently they're eating fried foods. That's great. Less great is they're reporting that they're eating less fruits and vegetables a day, less frequent. They're eating, 5 or more servings less frequently, which is not ideal. So I can look at each individual person and I can see, oh yeah, wait a minute, they're going from a 2 to a 1. Oh, this person went from rarely to sometimes. That's great. That's an improvement in behavior. They're more frequently doing a behavior that the class has taught them to do. That's awesome. But how do I quickly just kind of do some math and get this get a snapshot of what's happening with the participants? So hey, we'll call this I don't know, the difference, right? We can't call it improvement. Yes, because they might not be improving. And this is the fried food question. And this is the FNB. All right. So we will literally just take what? The post-test question, and we're going to subtract the pre-test question, the answer. And got a -1, which is what we want for the fried foods. We want those values to decrease, right? Decrease frequency. And then we'll just copy it over here and double check our formula. So now it's taking E3 minus B3. Perfect. That's what we want. All right. And then we'll just grab these formulas and we will copy them all the way down here. All right. And we have some positive numbers, we have some negative numbers, and we have some zeros. So people who didn't change their frequency. All right, that is great. So what does this all mean? We should probably count how many went up, how many went down, and how many stayed the same, right? So back to our friend COUNTIF. So again, it wants a range and it wants criteria, right? So here's our range. All right, so what's our criteria? Previously, our criteria was a word, right? It was never or sometimes or always, but now our criteria is a number, a positive number, a negative number, or a 0, right? So if we want to know how many folks decrease their frequency or have a negative number, then we need to make this a look for the negative number essentially. So we want to do, I'm trying to think if I need quotes. I might, let's find out together. Sure do, all right. There you go, okay. So again, rule. So always quotes. It always wants quotes when it's looking for a criteria. All right. So we look at this formula again. We wanted to count a cell in this range if it is less than 0, aka a negative number, and it got 6. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Perfect. So let's look for our zeros. So we want to count if a cell in this range, the criteria is that it is exactly 0, right? And it found 4 of those. 1, 2, 3, 4. Great. Again, it could be copying and pasting these as well, but I just wanted to do this this way. All right, and again, the range. And we're going to flip this around and we're going to look for anybody that is greater than 0. There are 2. All right, and we'll go ahead and we'll bring this over here and we'll see what we have. All right, so we'll call this a decrease. We'll call this the same, and we'll call this an increase. So just like that, I know that of my 12 folks, half of them have decreased the frequency in which they eat fried foods, that's awesome. That's a great number. That's a number that I would put on a report or share with somebody about my program. And then over here, we have 5 people, so almost half of them. And again, 10 out of 12 either staying the same or increasing the frequency which they eat 5 servings of fruits and veggies a day is pretty great as well. So again, a few minutes of math, and I now have a couple of really great deliverables that I can share with funders or stakeholders or bosses or county commissioners or whoever you might be talking to. And again, I can easily do the percentages as well, right? So, getting a percentage of people in my class who did that. All right, I got a few minutes left, and I want to briefly touch on if-then statements. They are really great for categorizing continuous data, for example. So here we have some A1C levels. So these are people who got a reading on their blood sugar, and we can. So here they are. It looks like maybe these are percentages, I believe. So something like 5% up to 11.5% for an A1C score. So A1C score is a good indicator of if you are diabetic or if you're pre-diabetic or if you don't have diabetes. So the cutoff is 6.5. So basically, if you're at or above 6.5, you essentially have diabetes. It's not that simple, of course, but this is one indicator that you might have diabetes. So I want to take this big range of numbers and I want to categorize these people as being diabetic or not diabetic. And I'm going to use an if-then statement. So again, a very logical statement. If something is true, then give me X. If it is not true, then give me Y. And so it is going to tell me right here. So if some value is true and if some value is false. So for example, if this cell, A2, if A2 is, let's do greater than or equal to 6.5. All right, so that is my logical test, right? So if A2 is greater than or equal to 6.5, now it wants the true value. So if that's true, what does it want me to say? I want it to say, we'll say diabetic. And if it is not true, false, then we'll say, I don't know what, not diabetic. Something like that. All right, so that's a really simple if-then statement. If one thing is true, then deliver this word. If it's not true, then deliver this word. So this person obviously is above 6.5, so it has returned the word diabetic because of that logical statement. So if I copy this and paste this all the way down, I now get essentially a category for each person. And then with that, I can put a filter on it. I can just sort out the diabetics and look at them separately, see if they have different outcomes or different results based on my class than the diabetics, which I couldn't have done with all this data. So that's just kind of a continuous range of scores. But now I have categories, which is a lot easier to compare two groups. So I can compare those two groups together. All right, so one step above that is a sort of a multi-factor if-then statement, if you want to get real fancy. We obviously don't pass people or fail people in this class, but I wanted to use this pass-fail idea as an example. So the diabetes program has 4 lessons. Not everybody comes to all of them, obviously, right? So they might only come to 3 of them or 2 of them. But let's say I wanted to issue a certificate for people who came to all 4, and we'll call that pass. We'll say they passed. If they didn't come to all 4, then they failed. Not really failed, but still. So here's my if-then statement. So this is one that takes in a bunch of logic and step back 2 things. So if you can see that, I have to add the and, right? So all of those things have to be true for it to deliver the word pass. So the yes is if they came to class, and the no is if they didn't come to class. So if they got a yes in lesson 1, a yes for lesson 2, lesson 3, and lesson 4, then they get a pass. If any of those are not yes, then they get a fail. So if-then statements can be as complicated as you want them to be, but they're very flexible in terms of what you're able to do. In terms of, you can really summarize a lot of information and basically into just one word. So, all right. What else did I want to do? I have 7 minutes left. I wanted to. This is a little bit different, but I like doing this as well. Conditional formatting. For those of you who did not know what it is essentially an if-then statement, but with formatting. So with text color and cell color. I find it really great to get a nice snapshot of my data. So let's use this diabetic, non-diabetic data set. So this is a great list, but it's all kind of blending together for me. Let's say I want the cells that say diabetic, I want those to be like green and like jump out at me. And the ones that are not diabetic, I want to be red. So they kind of don't, I can kind of like look past those. So we're going to go to conditional formatting, which is up here in your home ribbon. And we're going to apply some conditions. So we'll use the highlight cells rule. So conditional formatting, if you don't know, can be used for pretty much anything. So, you know, if you want to put it on cells that are bigger than a number or less than a number or between two numbers, you can do that. I'm going to use the text one. So let's see. All right. So text that contains, it's contains. So, I use the same word, so that's not going to be as great. All right. Let's say I want to get the word, I want to get, so any cell that contains the word not. Oh, you know what? I'll use this beginning with. All right. So any specific text in a cell that begins with the word not, we're going to make that red with dark red text. There we go. Just like that. It goes and it finds all the cells and it does that for you. So let's add another rule here. So we're going to add a second rule, and that is going to be cells that contain, we'll say cells that begin with diabetic. And we're going to make that green. There we go. So, you know, again, not really useful right here, but if I had a list of just a ton of stuff and I wanted to, I really wanted to see kind of at a glance 2 different categories or 3 or more categories, I could do that. You can also sort by this, which is pretty awesome. Debbie's shown you sort functions before, which we typically sort on the alphabet or on numbers, but you can sort on colors too. So let's see, sort on the cell color. So let's say I want all of the, all right now. All right, it's not letting me pick cell color. All right, no cell color on top. Oh, all right. It's not working for me, but it works.
I think it's because you have your columns selected.
The top, the red ones go to the top. But for some reason, it's not giving me the option to highlight the cell color.
I think it's because you have both columns selected, Brian.
Yep, exactly. So if I only had one column selected, I could do that, but then I would lose my the data attached to that, right? So if, for example, the entire row was green or red, then I could do that. Good point, Debbie. All right, I'm going to stop there because that was a ton of stuff and a couple minutes for any more questions, but I have some time after 2 o'clock to hang on for a bit if folks have specific questions about Excel.
So Brian, I'm going to go
Alright.
ahead and stop the recording.
That sounds like a plan.
All right.